Please welcome to the stage ALEC National Chairman, Florida Representative Daniel Perez.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to ask that everyone take their seats. I still see some walking in. By the way, the bacon this morning looked extra crispy, and I noticed you guys went extra hard on the bacon today. Webster, I saw you at the table. You went extra hard on the bacon today. I'm watching you. Webster Barnaby, a good man from Florida. All right, guys. Well, good morning, and thank you for being here. I hope you guys enjoyed the program yesterday. It was actually my favorite day thus far, and what I enjoyed the most was we were able to end it with our state dinners, and all of you were able to sit down with your colleagues and break bread and talk about the experiences you've had at ALEC, but hopefully you're talking about what you're going to take back home. That's the true purpose of ALEC, is for us to get together and take some of this good news back home and pass some of the great model policies that we're discussing here at ALEC. But right now we're about to welcome a man of honor, a man very important to this country, very smart, very, very smart man. You guys are used to smart people. We've had Dr. Laffer, Kathy Wood. Not to say that they aren't the smartest, they're up there, but this next one, you guys are going to be impressed. He's one of the best. A neurosurgeon, a former Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. You're gonna see where I'm going with this. And a man that has turned a story of triumph from adversity. He walks the walk. I'm excited for you guys to hear from him. You know, I was with him a couple years back in Miami, and he might not remember this because he's a celebrity and we're not, but he was walking around Miami, and in Miami, I love it, but it's a place full of egos. And in a place full of egos, this man was walking so humbly, and it was impressive to see that. A man of God, a faith-fearing man, and I appreciated that even in my own backyard of Miami. So without further ado, ALEC would like to welcome Dr. Ben Carson.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, Candy and I are absolutely delighted to be here, and really want to thank you all for your dedication to making things work in our nation. You know, normally on Friday mornings, I'm involved in a Bible study, Capital Ministries, with Ralph Drollinger using his 10-gallon words. We enjoy it, though, very much. And it's very fortifying to listen to the experiences of others. It's so important that we share our experiences and help each other, because we're in a difficult time in our nation right now. I think we are close to losing that city on the hill beacon status as we have ever been. And courage is what is required. And, you know, I'm reminded of a time when I was a neurosurgery resident, and I was on call. All the attendings were away at a national meeting except for one. And a young man was brought into the emergency room who had been severely beaten with a baseball bat. And he was unconscious, his brain was swelling, he had hemorrhages in his brain, and he was going to die. So I called for the attending who was left behind to take care of emergencies, couldn't reach him. The paging operator couldn't reach him, and the nurses couldn't reach him, and no one could reach him. And I had to make a decision. Should I do the safe thing, which is just intubate him and put him in the ICU with steroids and let nature take its course? Or should I take him to the operating room with no attending, which is illegal, and do an operation to take out part of his frontal lobe and part of his temporal lobe, a dangerous operation that I had never done before? And I just prayed and I said, Lord, you have to help me determine what to do. And after that prayer, I knew exactly what I had to do. I had to take him to the operating room, do the operation. And I remembered everything when I got into that operating room and what exactly to do. And it was successful. And today that young man is a child psychologist helping other people. But I never got into any trouble whatsoever. And it was God who gave me the courage. And that is what we need, what each one of us needs. And I want to thank you all for having the courage to do what you're doing. But now we have to have the courage to actually stand up for what we believe in. Because you cannot be the land of the free if you're not the home of the brave. And with that, I just want to offer an opening prayer. Most kind and gracious Father in heaven, we're so thankful for the individuals here who have dedicated their lives to trying to make life better for their fellow man, to be involved in legislative processes that point the pathway to true happiness and greatness. We ask that you would provide the courage and the direction and be with us during this entire conference and as we leave to go to our separate places, and use us as your instruments to make America truly one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We pray in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Please welcome to the stage 2015 ALEC National Chairman, Texas Senator Phil King.
Good morning. I was, man, what, Dr. Carson, what great words. And, you know, every time I listen to you, I just, and I'm just, not just saying this because you're here, but every time I listen to you, long or a short speech, I always get inspired and encouraged, and thank you so much. It was just great words and a great prayer this morning, so thank you. I was sitting there as we were here this morning and thinking, I guess I've been involved in ALEC since, I've kind of lost track, Lisa, like 2003, 4, or 5, around then, and you know, it's just gets better and better, and we just feel like we're at our peak right now. It just seems like every annual is better, and so thanks for all the work that you've done, Lisa Nelson, and to the whole staff as we go through this last day. Thank you. Well, I have a really easy and very short job this morning, and that's to introduce our next speaker. And what we're going to have today is, a little bit after the next speaker, is a discussion about some of the basics of what we believe, which is that government should not be interfering, should not be telling business how to set their prices, how to manage their portfolio. And we're going to have a great discussion, but we're going to kick off this morning hearing from someone who understands the role of business, because he's managed and owned a very impressive business in the Houston area. It's Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. He has a long background in broadcasting, both television and radio, but most important is his job as a Texas senator, and then as now the Lieutenant Governor, which in Texas you serve as the President of the Senate. And I will tell you this, that I know my Texas history pretty well, and I do not know that there has ever been a Lieutenant Governor who has accomplished more, both in terms of fiscal responsibility, but also moral clarity in Texas's history. And I don't say that lightly. I'm hoping he'll talk a little bit about some of the things that have happened under his leadership in Texas, but also I'm kind of hoping, Governor, that maybe you talk a little bit about your relationship with the Lord and how that has led you to be the outstanding leader that you are. And I will say this in inviting you up, and is that a lot of us know how to do our jobs in the legislature, But then there are certain people that are very unique in their ability to coordinate and manage and lead people in a way that just encourages them and pushes them forward. And that's Dan Patrick. So, Lieutenant Governor, if you'll come up here and join us, thank you for being here today.
Good morning. Dr. Carson, I don't know if he remembers this, but I remember it well the first time I was on Air Force One with him. There's a conference room and a table of 6 seats, and there's 2 on each side, 1 at the head of the table. And when you're going down the runway, Air Force One takes off like a rocket, because the most dangerous time for a president to be on Air Force One is on the ground. And so when I walked in the conference room, the 1 seat at the end of the table, facing the cockpit, was open for me. Dr. Carson invited me to sit down. What he didn't tell me is when that plane takes off like a rocket, everyone's drinks and food all comes our way. So thank you, Dr. Carson. You know exactly what I'm talking about. And then the next time I was on, I did it to someone else, so it all works out. I was thinking about politics, and my first run for office, major office, was to be president of the senior class at Andover High School outside of Baltimore, where I'm from. Been in Texas for 40 years, but that's where I'm from. I was a junior class vice president, but I wanted to be president. So that year, I decided that I'd set up multiple voting locations. Only juniors were supposed to vote at the end of the year, but I said it was okay with freshmen and sophomores. I told those who were counting the votes it's okay. No voter ID was required. I set up a mail-in program for students who may be playing hooky or sick. Strangely enough, we had more mail-in ballots come in than we had students in the class. It was at that moment, as I look back, that I realized I was a Democrat. And my campaign was, and this is true, I used to have a big Motown band back in the 60s, about a 17-piece band, and so I promised I'd get the Temptations for our senior prom. Of course, I had no idea how I'd do that or pay for it, but I was elected. Overwhelmingly, mail-in ballots were important. And all of my 300 classmates, I said, well, you're going to have to go out and get a summer job, work to pay for these tickets. And they said, wait a minute, you ran on it. You should provide those tickets free of charge to us. And I realized that all my classmates were Democrats. So it's been 38 years since, between jobs, that I ran for the Texas Senate back in 2006. And the office, as Phil said, of Lieutenant Governor is unique in Texas as the majority president and majority leader. The Lieutenant Governor, the office that I was able to win, we appoint all the chairs of the committee, all the members of the committees, which bills come to the floor. And so obviously it's a very important job that I take very seriously. And we make $600 a month, by the way, in Texas. We're the 8th largest economy in the world. We just passed a $20 billion budget. That's a 2-year budget. Because our founders said, we don't want you there a lot and we don't want to pay you. So we're there every other year, although we have many special sessions. We'll be there through October of this year. Every senator, every House member makes $600 a month. I make $600 a month. They are truly public servants. We have a lot of turnover. We don't have term limits, but we have turnover because after about 6 years, Mama or Papa, we have a lot of women members now, say, hey, I thought this was a part-time job. You need to be home. And it's true. So we have tremendous turnover, probably 25 to 30% in the 150-member Texas House every year and 10 or 15% in the Texas Senate. So a lot of new people all the time coming in, and it's a privilege to be the Lieutenant Governor. I want to talk a little bit about leadership today, because what Dr. Carson talked about is really the fact that we need bold, conservative, principled, and for our money, Christian leaders in the battle that we are in for the soul of this nation right now. I want to give you some dates, just at random. 11/22/63, 4/4/68, 6/5/68, 5/4/70, 8/4/74, and August 30th, 75. Do you remember those dates? Do you know what happened? John F. Kennedy was assassinated. Martin Luther King was assassinated. Robert F. Kennedy was assassinated. I remember Martin Luther King's assassination, 4/4, it's my birthday. I remember RFK's assassination. It was the night before our prom, and as senior class president, I was to speak and didn't know really what to say that next day to the hundreds of parents who were there. It was something unimaginable. And the next day, Kent State, 4 students killed just a few years later. 4 years after that, Richard Nixon got on the helicopter and resigned from the White House. And then less than a year later, the fall of Saigon. From 1963 through 1975, this was a dark time in this nation. Our Constitution was at risk. Imagine today if in a 10-year period we had a president, his brother, civil rights leader, all assassinated in a period of years, and George Wallace, who was shot. I was on the way to do an interview with him. I was a young reporter at a radio station. He was in Laurel, Maryland. He got shot on the day before the Democrat primary. They won. The Democrats won the primary in Maryland that year. Imagine all of that happening now in a 10-year period today. So I say this to remind us we have been here before. We have been here before when we needed strong leaders. I always pray supernatural words, wisdom, and favor. And I was at a church one morning, and a lady from the choir came up and said, "You left something out." She said, "You didn't pray for courage." The Lord gives you favor. Just ask. The Lord gives you wisdom and knowledge. Read Proverbs. He'll give you the words if you'll listen. But are you willing to act on those words? And so I've always added courage since then. You see, we're at a time different from the 60s and the early 70s because we were more united as a nation. We did not have the anti-God, socialist, Marxist movement that we have today in this nation. And make no mistake, it's the anti-God against those of us who believe in God crowd. You know, you ask yourself, why is the left so angry? You would be angry if you had no hope beyond this life. We have peace because we know that we will be in heaven with our Lord and Savior. And so when I believe our many Christian members in the Senate and the Texas House and myself, when we take a position and we get criticized for it, and believe me, we get criticized for it, I'd rather be voted out of office than voted out of heaven. It's a very simple equation. So, as I go through our policy initiatives, and we had a great session this session. You've already heard about the biggest property tax cut in the history of the world, $18 billion. We also gave retired teachers 75 and over a $7,500 check and the first cost of living allowance ever. I met 2 teachers a few weeks ago at the Capitol, both over 75. They said, "Governor, thank you. We're getting $15,000 this year. And we're going to save about $1,450 on Senator Betancourt's property tax bill." That's real life money. We as conservatives cannot shy away from doing the right thing, no matter the criticism. We will always be criticized because the devil is at work every day and we stand in his way. Make no mistake. It is a battle for our country. What kind of country do we have where we had to pass a law this session to stop men from playing girls' sports in college? That's just common sense. What kind of country where the University of Pennsylvania swim team said this week they had to stand next to the transgender swimmer and stand there as he was naked in the shower in front of those women. And what do the Democrats and what does the country do? What does the left woke society do? They say the women are at fault. And they shouldn't ask for a special privilege. All they wanted was a curtain in the shower. And the university said no. What kind of country where we mutilate children because some irresponsible parent thinks that their little boy or little girl should change sex. God's been very clear on that. God's been very clear on that, and all of these issues. So don't be afraid to stand up for the cultural issues. Don't be afraid to make the tough fiscal issues. When you have extra money, send it back to the people who sent it in the first place through taxes, and that's the taxpayers. Never back up on that. We had a $32 billion surplus. We said we're going to spend more than half of it. And send it back to the taxpayers. Retired teachers. We put $2.5 billion of it in mental health care facilities. We're building 7 new hospitals in Texas. We put for the first time $350 million into rural law enforcement. We have 254 counties in the state of Texas. We had some sheriffs making $35,000 a year. We can't find good people to do that job for that money. So we did a lot of good things, but we have to, as a conservative Christian nation that we are, we cannot back down. We must stand up, because Dr. Carson is right. If we don't win in 24, then my grandson who's here today, who just turned 13, his future's at risk. His future's at risk. I have a coin I give out. It's a coin of the Alamo. It's verse Matthew 20:26. For those who wish to lead, you must first serve. Jesus came not as a king. He came not as a leader. He came as a servant. And we in the public office sector need to remember that. And we need to be humble about our position, because a year after you're gone from office, no one will remember what you did. They won't remember your name. They will move on to next, and that's okay. That's okay. Our job is not to get praise. Our job is to do what the people sent us there to do. Because when you run for office, say what you're going to do what you said you were going to do, because that's what you're supposed to do. And we have to do that more than ever. And if you think, well, I'm important, I'm a leader. Look at Winston Churchill. For 8 years, 3 years before we got into World War II, remember, he saved England. And thank God, because we would not have had a landing place to send our troops to eventually attack the German army on Omaha Beach. For 8 years, against unbelievable odds, he led that nation and kept this world free. And 3 months after the Germans surrendered, they voted him out of office. You think of a short-term memory? And why did they vote him out of office? And this is something everyone in office needs to remember. It's not about what you've done. Be proud of it for a while. It's what you're going to do. He talked about what he did, but not the vision that the people wanted to move on after the war. And shockingly, his party overwhelmingly lost. He came back as prime minister in 1951. They reelected him. So as leaders, don't ever seek credit. Don't ever think that people who support you today are going to remember you when you're gone. It's okay. I had someone at the Capitol this year say to me when we were fighting over the property tax bill, they said, well, we passed a homestead exemption before, but no one ever thanked me for it. And I thought, how shallow you are. Because most of what we do, no one's going to thank us for. That's not the reason. We do things if we believe it's the right thing for people. And as leader of the Senate, look, my job is not to be liked. My job is to work hard, to be knowledgeable, to take bold positions, and not back down. That's what a leader should do. My job is to be respected, because if you're in business, in politics, to be liked, you will not succeed. Your job is there to represent the people who voted you into office. And in terms of the lobby here today supporting ALEC, I appreciate that. This is an important organization for all together, once or more a year as schedules permit. But remember, members, the most important lobbyist you want to hear from every day that you have to make a tough decision is God. That's who I listen to first. What would he say about this? What's his position on this? So thank you for allowing me to be here. It's a privilege. It's a privilege that people elect us to office. Yeah, you can raise money for an election, and you have to, and it costs a lot in Texas. But the reality is none of you bought your way in. No one buys their way in. They go in the voting booth, and they vote for you because at some point when they heard you or met you, they believed in you. They trusted you. And so after they elect you, they're done. They got a family to raise. They have a business to build. They have a job to do. So don't ever let go of that trust that they gave you. Every day I walk in the Texas Capitol, I was sent there on the wings and the trust of the people. And I'm proud of the senators, the House members, and I know all of you from other states feel the same way. But don't ever lose sight of that. Don't ever lose sight of that. And for those of you, and this isn't a church call, this is not an altar call, I'm not passing the plate. But if you don't know Jesus Christ, you're missing out on the most important voice and the most important friend and the most important mentor that you'll ever have. I bloomed late in life. I always went to church as a kid. I didn't know what it was to be born again. My wife's Catholic. I'm Baptist. We raised our kid Baptist. Both my kids went to Baylor. They got a degree in evangelical bingo calling, so they're set for either side. And I told my wife today before I left, we just celebrated our 48th anniversary, Dr. Carson, 48. And I said to her, Jan, I have 8 grandchildren, 2 kids. They've been very productive for 2 kids. I said, Jan, when we first moved to Texas, I was in television and radio. Moved from Washington, D.C., where I worked with some guy. I don't know what happened to his career, Al Roker. We worked at the same station. I don't think he was very good. I don't think he made it, because I don't watch NBC. Why would I have any idea of watching the Today Show? Al's a great guy, actually. But I said, Jan, when we moved to Texas in 1979, in your wildest dreams, did you ever think I would be the lieutenant governor of the state of Texas and be invited to go to Florida and speak to some of the most outstanding leaders in our country? And she said, honey, I don't want to burst your bubble, but in 48 years of marriage, you've not been in any of my wildest dreams. Thank you all, and God bless. Thank you all.
Please welcome to the stage ALEC Chief Executive Officer Lisa B. Nelson.
I don't want to hear about any more wild dreams, Lieutenant Governor. That was very, very inspiring, and especially with Dr. Carson leading us off. What a great way to start the morning. You know, at ALEC, we've come a long way. We've talked about the 50 years now, all for the last week. And we've been identifying and fine-tuning and sharing some of the most trusted policy solutions the country has ever seen. And now we're about to hear from some people who can help us lead into the next 50 years with regard to those policy solutions. Founder of Americans for Tax Reform, Grover Norquist has been a leading voice for limited government, lower taxes for decades. He's helped to build one of the most powerful movement conservative activists who are fighting to shrink the size and scope of government. He's also a brilliant strategist. We were strategizing last night over a cigar, who has consistently outmaneuvered those who prefer higher taxes and even higher spending time and time again. He's even shown that it's possible to win on tax reform in Democrat-controlled Congresses. Julian Morris is the senior scholar for the International Center for Law and Economics, previously serving as Vice President of Research for the Reason Foundation and Executive Director for the London-based International Policy Network. Julian has written about a variety of issues, ranging from the morality of free trade to the regulation of the internet. And moderating today's panel and discussion is Steve Rauschenberger, someone I've known for probably 20 years. A 15-year member of the Illinois State Senate, Steve is also a small business owner, instructor of the U.S. State Department, and actually past president of NCSL, which is when I first got to know you. So please come to the stage. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. There's no Al Roker up here right now. I have the privilege of leading a brief discussion about what I think is one of the most successful American systems that we all are so comfortable with, we kind of forget about. If you think about the impact of the pandemic and how important it was for businesses to be able to pivot, and how crucial it was for them to have a way to transact those kind of transactions online or remotely. The electronic payment network provided the kind of underlayment that made possible a lot of things that happened in the COVID era. It served America well for the last 40 years, but interestingly enough, it's under attack both at some state levels and at the federal level. We're going to talk a little bit with some experts about why would Congress or legislatures want to interject themselves into this system and what the reasons are. First, I'm going to ask Julian to tell us a little bit about his perspective on the federal issue.
Sure. Well, you may be familiar with some legislation passed as part of the Dodd-Frank Act in 2010, known as the Durbin Amendment. There was an amendment passed that capped fees that issuing banks could charge, large issuing banks, banks with capitalization over 10 billion, that could charge for the transaction, basically, on debit cards. So the premise for that was that these transactions were costing merchants too much, that if they were capped, the benefits would flow through from the merchants who would, in their wisdom, reduce prices and consumers would all benefit. In reality, fees were capped, but almost none of those benefits went to consumers. Meanwhile, the banks lost in the region of $6.5 billion a year as a result of this. And what did those banks do? Well, they're not going to make a loss on their business, so they had to recoup their fees in other ways. Did it mainly by increasing monthly fees to users of the banking system, the consumers, and raising the minimum level necessary to have a checking account, which went from about $200 to about $700. I mean, on average for these larger banks. A really big hit, especially on poorer consumers. We did some work back in 2014. We estimated that several 100,000 people probably left the banking system as a result of that, ended up relying on payday loans. So that's the background to this. Now, in spite of the damage done by this original Durbin Amendment, Dick Durbin's come back, and he wants to do it again, but he wants to do it this time for credit cards. So he and Roger Marshall, J.D. Vance, have got a proposal in that they're calling it, it's a bizarre name, the Credit Card Competition Act. And this Credit Card Competition Act would require issuers of credit cards to allow competing networks on their cards. The consequences of this, it's a little bit obscure. It sounds like it's a good thing, like create competition, but actually right now, there are tight agreements between card issuers and the networks, Visa, MasterCard, and so on. And those agreements enable the card networks to monitor all the transactions. So, you know when you get a fraud alert on your card? That's happened because every single transaction that is processed is being monitored. And if you do something unusual or look like you're doing something unusual, the network tells the issuer that there's a problem and hold on this transaction, tell the card owner not to do it. Well, that's possible because all of the transactions on that card go through the same network. The other thing that it makes possible is the payment of interchange fees at a set rate. Again, it's a contract between the network and the issuer, which enables those issuers to offer cards of different kinds. So, for example, if you, I don't know how many of you have rewards cards, a majority probably, that have, you know, your airline rewards or hotel rewards or shopping rewards. Well, those rewards are made possible by this interchange fee, which is paid ultimately by the merchants. But it's only possible to do that if that agreement is in place, and if you force the issuers to allow competing networks on their card, you break the chain on both on the fraud alerts, and you break the chain on the reimbursements for those rewards. So there's a great risk, I think, that if the Credit Card Competition Act were to come into being, that there would be a massive decline in the ability for issuers to compete with one another on these services. So you've got this perverse effect on competition. So there you go.
So Grover, we've got willing partners contracting to have a system. I'm a retailer. I contract with a bank to process. There's a contract an understanding between the customer and the cardholder. Why would Congress be interjecting itself into what's a robust competitive marketplace and setting prices?
For the same reason politicians have been doing this for about 4,000 years. They're not needed in a particular area. Everything's going fine, and they would like to jump in on behalf of one party against another and then get credit for it. It's annoying. You'd think after 4,000 years, price controls would have failed so many times to do. And as you mentioned, Durbin, the Democratic senator from Illinois, has stolen this idea from antiquity and plagiarized stupid on his own. But everything he told us would happen when they passed this bill, and they hand the regulations over to the Federal Reserve system. One of the things that we're trying to do these days is to take a look at the Constitution and ask if the Federal Reserve System or the ICC or the FDA, any of those things are mentioned in the Constitution anywhere, or whether there's anything that says Congress is allowed to go create some structure which will manage things. No. And instead of pulling back from taking powers, legitimate or not, that the House, Senate, President have, and handing them over to third parties so people cannot, I didn't do that. And the mistakes, the challenges we've had since they passed the Durbin Amendment attacking debit cards, everything he said good would happen, didn't. It didn't bring prices down. There were all sorts of bad things that he didn't mention that did happen, such as losing rewards and so on. Now he wants to do the same thing for credit cards that he did to people with debit cards, and he learned nothing from all of the failures of his first plan, so now he wants to do it again. And one of the reasons I think we're talking here today is because they're having some trouble convincing the senators who got talked into doing the first dumb idea. They're having trouble selling them again. Luckily, Vance out of Ohio volunteered to be an idiot. And oh, is this against the free market? Yes, I'll do that. Thank you. I don't know why he didn't stay in Appalachia, but anyway, they're having trouble selling senators on doing this again. So now they're trying to go to state legislators who may not have noticed this didn't get a lot of it. Really bad ideas in Washington don't get a lot of attention because the left doesn't want them to get a lot of attention because then people might stop them. So now they're trying to move it through the state level to set up similar structures to regulate the relationship between credit card companies, banks, and retailers and so on. Slightly different, but really completely the same price control.
Right. Julian, the price controls and caps on interchange have been implemented in other countries. Can you tell us a little bit about the Australian experience or the European Union, where they've surged ahead of us in idiocy, you know?
So Australia was one of the first out of the gate in this idiotic spree to change the relationship between the networks and the banks. Now in Australia, they have their own sort of state-sponsored debit system called FPOS, and the Reserve Bank of Australia implemented caps on interchange fees about 20 years ago. The intention of which was actually 20 years ago, 2003. The intention of which was essentially to move transactions away from credit cards and towards the use of FPOS and cash. And it kind of worked. FPOS still sucks, but you've got an FPOS card, you can't use it internationally, etc. But people did switch their transactions somewhat. And they did so in part because the issuers, because they weren't getting the same interchange fee rates, significantly reduced rewards and increased annual fees. So people were incentivized not to use those things. Now, at the same time, there was a switch from using what's called the four-party system, so the bank credit cards that were are run by Visa and MasterCard mainly, towards the three-party systems, so Discover and American Express, which act kind of as their own banks. Anyway, so there was a switch in Australia, and the proportion of transactions running over American Express especially went up by about 25% because that system wasn't capped. They subsequently introduced caps, and the use of that system fell down. So that's what happened in Australia. Very straightforward. You put a cap on one thing, you force people to end up encouraging people to do something else. In Europe, they put even more stringent caps in place, and somewhat the same thing happened. Rewards basically went away. If you're in Britain, which implemented this before Brexit and has carried on with the same system, so if you look now to look at credit card rewards in the UK, what's the best available? Literally the only cards, or pretty much the only cards that have any significant rewards are American Express cards, because they're not subject to those caps. So it really massively adversely affects competition over the supply of good things.
So when you artificially suppress the price, what happens to access to credit? I mean, what happens to the bank's willingness to compete against each other if there's not margin? I mean, isn't it kind of a slow crawl to the bottom?
You could call it it's a balloon effect or a waterbed effect. So what happens is the banks seek to recover costs in other ways. So the other thing that happened in the EU, and this is a study commissioned by the European Union itself and produced by Copenhagen Economics and Ernst & Young, so we can take it as fairly reliable, I think. They found that the interest rates on cards, on average, rose, right? So relative to, so the differential between the base rate and the rate. So you've got an objective measure there. So they were recovering their costs.
So it's the wisdom of central bankers in Australia, in the European Union, and now our Federal Reserve that's leading us to this visionary pathway. Is this the right time, Grover, for us to be punishing local banks and credit unions and making their revenue streams kind of subject to the whims of Congress? I mean, it seems like the Federal Reserve has already stressed out the banking system. What's really going on here?
No, it's never a good idea to do something that history and economics tells you will end up poorly. Now we've watched the Europeans do it poorly. We've watched it go bad in Australia. I've always wanted to visit Australia ever since I saw that Sound of Music movie. We should learn from other countries that do something that don't work. We should also learn they do it to debit cards. Now they want to do it to credit cards. These are fairly similar structures. It's all in the United States. And we've seen this fail. Good news that those states that had bills like this at the state level, versions of this that failed, were stopped. Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Idaho, North Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, have all had efforts that failed. So they're coming to a state near you. Watch for it. One thing that keep an eye on, there is a challenge where some different companies were saying, well, we're going to keep track, like credit card companies, we're going to keep track of who buys a gun. And maybe the government could get their hands on that. This effort to regulate credit cards does not stop that. It has nothing to do with it. Every once in a while, we've seen in some of these states, they go, oh yeah, that'll fix this. No, it won't. Matter of fact, it will lessen the privacy of your purchases to go with the new regulation. So don't let somebody tell you that this protects the privacy of gun owners. It doesn't. But it has fooled a few people that we were kind of surprised, got talked into, oh yeah, I'll help on this. Watch for it. I think we're going to beat them at the federal level, and we have been beating them at the state level with these efforts, but they'll keep coming back. Someone will try and, the way you know it's a really bad idea is Dick Durbin keeps trying to stick this, and did the last time, on another bill. He doesn't, if it was a really good idea, stand alone, look at this. Don't mess up my bill with your stuff. This is such a wonderful bill, everyone wants. No, he hangs around, he waits until a train's about to leave and announces he's going to blow up the train, unless you take his bill with it. That's a real hint that he knows it doesn't pass the laugh test.
Yeah, so when you hear that a bill's being proposed that's supposed to help small restaurants and take care of small merchants, and it sounds like bread and butter, and you get to punish the banks, beware, because there's a lot more in that bill than you would expect. Kind of sort of in wrapping up, where should we be on policies related to retail and to the Federal Reserve, and a quick economic wrap-up as we have our last
Quick economic wrap, or we could reverse the original Durbin Amendment. We could also look at what the Federal Reserve is thinking about doing on minimum reserves for banks. They're wanting to pump that up on the basis of the new Basel agreements to 16%, which is going to make the US less competitive. It's going to raise the cost of capital anyway. So, yeah.
Last words, Grover?
When I was in college, my competitors on the left wanted us to be some sort of cross between East Germany and Yugoslavia. Now they want us to be Europe, okay, which sounds less frightening, but if you've been over there, it's pretty tedious. The cars are really teeny, and they try and pretend it's bigger by having kilometers rather than miles. And you think you're driving at 110, not in kilometers. So increasingly, the left's future is let's be Europe. And this is following that model. And it doesn't matter that Europe, runs out of energy and has to turn off the lights from time to time. They haven't started eating insects yet, but I'm waiting for that. They're getting their bad ideas. At least, France is an improvement over East Germany. But
food's better.
Yes, the food is better. I'd prefer, we all left places like this in order to not be there. And I'd prefer that we don't drag some of their less useful ideas and statist policies over here. And again, it's not overnight awful. It's just reducing the ability of companies to compete, of consumers to choose what they want to do, just a little bit here and there. And who needs hot water in the morning? The sort of stuff that the left keeps adding onto. The lights have to convince you have glaucoma, and on the Sabbath you have to keep the green glass from the brown glass from the white glass for the recycling priests. All of this is just more of that nonsense.
So our chant ought to be, as we walk out of here, based on the policy views of these gentlemen, myself, is, hands off our credit card. Stay out of a system that works well for millions of customers, for thousands of banks and credit unions, that has a competitive, robust 14-network system. Leave it alone. Don't try to make it better with help from the Federal Reserve. So would you all join me in a rousing thank you to these two gentlemen for their time this morning? Great job. Thank you both.
Please welcome back to the stage Lisa Nelson.
Thank you so much, guys. Steve, can you do something about Dick Durbin? Hasn't he been around for too long? It just... That's right. Credit for standing up for credit. Well, it's a reminder that at ALEC, we always are trying to find that intersection between business and policy. And, you know, we've coined the phrase trusted policy solutions because we don't want to be the organization that just kind of follows the bright, shiny object and chases down some of these things. We always do want to have that conversation, listen to the businesses, hear what's going to be the unintended consequences, and make sure that we kind of drive towards a solution that makes sense, but then that also doesn't enlarge in the scope of government and give them too much power. So really appreciated those comments, and we're glad that you guys were here. Thanks so much. We have a lot of work to do today as we have our closing. This is a final bit of housekeeping. We have a suburban caucus and task force meetings and our final gathering at lunch today. The suburban caucus is meeting in Cordova 5 and 6. The Communications and Technology Task Force is meeting in Mediterranean Ballroom 1 and 2. The Task Force on Civil Justice is in Del Lago 1 and 2, and Education and Workforce, Mediterranean Ballroom 3, Energy, Environment, and Agriculture in Mediterranean Ballroom 6 and 7, and the Joint Task Force on Federalism and International Relations in Amarante 2 and 3. I know Danny would pronounce that so much better than me. Look forward to all the conversations in your task force meetings and your workshops, and we will see you a little bit later. Thank you so much, and have a great day.